Welcome back everybody, this is the Helpful Lockpicker here, and the video I have for you today is part of my lockpicking homeschool series. This series is dedicated to helping you learn how to pick your first lock and hopefully grow up to an intermediate level. The topic I have for you today is a very important topic, and it will be the foundation of you moving forward in your lockpicking journey. We're going to go over today the 5 pen states that you can find a pen and tumbler lock in when you're trying to pick it open. This is a very important topic, and this will be the framework that you'll need to work off of when you're trying to understand the feedback that a lock is giving you. We're going to have more information on this coming up in just a second, so please stay tuned. The first state that I'd like to go over is the resting state. This is when the lock is at rest, and this is before any picking has even taken place. All of the key pins and driver pins are in their natural position and nothing has been manipulated. I'm going to get you a close-up on this state and go into more detail on it right now. So what I have in front of us here is an example of the resting state. In this clear acrylic padlock, you can see that each driver pin here is sitting recessed down into the plug, and it is securing the lock. This is one of the easiest states to learn because it is just the lock at rest. This is just how the lock will sit when it's securing something, and it's a pretty easy state to learn. What I'd like to go over next is the set state. It is arguably the most important state for you to master because the set state is what opens locks. What the set state is, you have successfully lifted your driver pin up above the shear line. Now the driver pin has stayed set, the key pin has dropped back down, and now that chamber has nothing obstructing plug rotation. How you typically get to this state is you'll search for a binding pin lifting up on each key pin. Once you find the pin that is binding, you will lift it up above the shear line, and often you'll hear an audible click. Once that pin is set, the key pin will drop back down and it will start to feel pretty floppy. The key pin will only be held up by the weight of gravity, so you can kind of jiggle it and feel that the pin is set. This is the most important state to learn because once all of the pins going across are in the set state, nothing will be obstructing plug rotation, and your lock will open and you'll successfully picked your lock. I'm going to get you a close-up on this in just a second. Now what I'd like to try to do is give you a close-up of what the set state looks like. So I'm going to probe each key pin and try to start setting some of the driver pins. So I'm going to look for the binding pin. So one's binding up pretty strongly, so I'm going to lift that up. Got a good click, that feels set. The driver pin is staying up. The key pin has fallen back down, and now the key pin feels very floppy. So same thing on 2, same thing on 3, same thing on 4. So now how I can identify if the pin is set, I'm just going to probe each key pin one at a time. One feels floppy, just like the weight of gravity holding it up, so that one feels set. Same with 2, 3, and 4. You can see that I still have some additional driver pins that need to be set. 5 and 6, and this is a close-up of what the set state looks like. The state I'd like to go over next is considered the overset state, which can be a very frustrating state for when people are first starting out. Essentially what has happened is you've set your key pin up too high, and it is now blocking plug rotation. What can make you at risk for oversetting pins is using too little tension. You could have a lock with very aggressive bitting, or you could have a lock with some serrated key pins. There are a lot of factors that lead to oversetting a pen, but there are a few things you can do to help overcome it. One, you can use a little bit more tension because that will lessen the probability of you oversetting a pen. It just makes it physically more difficult. Also, if the keyway will allow, you can use deeper hooks so you can reach around those long key pins to set those shorter key pins sitting behind them. What I'm going to do now is get you a close-up of the overset state and go over it in a little bit more detail. What I'd like to do now is go over how an overset pen presents itself. So what I'm going to do is start to pick this lock, and then I'm going to intentionally overset key pin 3. So as I try to overset key pin 3, you can see that key pin 2 is now overset as well. What causes a key pin to overset is you have lifted it up too high, and now it is wedged between the plug and the Bible. This has a few consequences because it will make the lock very difficult to bind up any other pins, and also this is not compatible with opening up a lock because plug rotation is going to be blocked as long as you have an overset key pin. The best technique to treat an overset key pin is prevention. what I like to do is increase the tension as much as I can that is reasonable for the lock, and that just makes oversetting much more difficult. But if you do get a key pin overset, there's a couple things you can do. Number one is prevention, so increasing tension, or maybe even using a deeper hook so you can go down and around those longer key pins and you can hit those shorter key pins without the shank height of your pick lifting up all the other key pins and oversetting them. In order to fix an overset pin, what I like to do is drop down the tension, and hopefully just the key pin will drop back down and the driver pins will remain set. Oftentimes when you do this, you need to completely reset the lock and start over. Another technique some people like to do is do some light tension and give the lock a quick zip. Sometimes that will help drop them back down. As you can see, 2 and 3 are still set after that quick little zip. A overset pin can be very frustrating for someone starting out, and it's important for you to understand how to identify one. So when you have overset a pin, what you need to do is understand the feedback. One thing might be you're noticing you're not being able to find any more pins binding. That is a very true sign. Another thing is you may be probing each key pin and then you'll feel like one of the key pins has simply disappeared. That could be because the key pin is sitting up so high in the plug and in the Bible you may not be able to feel it anymore, and that is an example of how one may present. Another thing is you'll be lifting up on each key pin and you'll come to one, say 3 here, that will just feel so immovable and it'll be so stiff. This is because the key pin is wedged between the Bible and the plug so strongly that the tension you're putting on the lock is making it so the key pin will not move. So if you ever feel a key pin that is so tightly bound up, it may be an overset key pin and you may need to evaluate some interventions to get the lock open. This has been a close-up on how overset pins look and present. The next state I'd like to go over is the underset state. What is going on in this state is you have started to lift a binding driver pin up, but you have not lifted it high enough to clear the shear line. Unfortunately, when you're in this state, the driver pin is still obstructing plug rotation, and this will not be able to get a lock open. So in order to get through this, you're going to need to probe each key pin and search for that binding pin. You're going to need to set it all the way until it clears the shear line and the driver pin stays set and the key pin drops back down. In order to feel for a set pin, often you can probe each key pin and you'll feel the one that feels kind of floppy. Once the driver pin is completely set, the key pin is only going to be held up by gravity and it will just feel very lightweight and floppy. Underset pins can be really notorious when you're working on serrated pins. They love to be underset, but with just a lot of practice and technique, you can get through them very easily. So I'm going to get a close-up on this in just a second. What I would like to do now is go over how an underset pin will present itself. So what you have done is you have probed each key pin and you have now found your binding pin. You have started to lift it up so you can set it above the shear line, but you have not lifted it up high enough. Part of the driver pin is going to be sitting up in the Bible, and the other part is going to be sitting down, recessed in the plug. This is not compatible with opening up the lock, and you will not be able to get your lock open until you are able to lift it up above the shear line. In order to remedy this, you need to probe each key pin, find the binding pin, and lift it up the rest of the way. So let's try to find an underset pin now. So I just set 1, 2 feel set, 3 feel set, 4, binding up, but I only got a couple clicks out of 4 and it is not set all the way. 4 is still partially obstructing the plug and I just need to probe each key pin and find the one that's binding. So 1, 2, 3 feel good, 4, another little click out of it, it has cleared the shear line, and now when I feel the key pin in 4, it feels nice and floppy like the weight of gravity, and it feels like a set pin. So now we only have 2 more pins to go, but let's go over to 5. So now as I'm lifting up 5, you can see the spool is only partially lifted all the way. It was in its resting state like in 6 where it was all the way down like this. So the driver pin in position 5 is going to block plug rotation. So once again, we're we're going to need to probe for the one that's binding. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Going to just set that, and now it has cleared the shear line, and now we only have one pen to go, and once we get the last pen set, our lock will open right up. So the problem with underset pens are they can be very difficult for people that are first starting out, especially when you start getting into serrated pens, like you can see in position 3 and 4 here. Serrated pens are very notorious for causing underset situations, and it just takes a lot of practice and diligence to get through them, and as anything, practice, practice, practice will make you better, and this has been a close-up on how an underset pen will present itself. The fifth and final state is really a fun state for people to learn. It is called the false set state. What happens when you're in the false set state is the core starts to turn over like it's going to open, but it is still obstructed by a pen like a spool pen, mushroom pen, or T-pen. To make this more simple, I'm going to refer to all the pens as spool pens. So in order to get into a false set, typically what you need to do is set all the non-spool pens in your lock, and then the lock will start to turn over like it's going to open. It does this because a spool pen has a thicker outside diameter and a thinner inside diameter. When the plug is getting stuck on that thinner diameter, it will start to turn like it's going to open, but it is certainly still obstructing it. As you start to lift up on that spool pen, it will start to straighten out the lock, providing counter rotation. You need to keep your tension on the lock, but allow it to rotate back, and as the spool pen clears the shear line, hopefully you'll get your lock open. I'm going to get a close-up on how a false set presents in just a second. So what I'd like to do now is go over one of the most fun pen states to learn, which is the false set. I'm going to try to get you a couple different angles on how it presents itself, and we're just going to go over it right now. So how a false set presents itself is typically you're going to need a pen like a spool pen. It may be a spool pen, a T-pen, or a mushroom pen, but for the purposes of this, I'm going to just call them all spool pens. So once you set all the non-spool pens in the lock, in this lock it would be in 3 and 4, which are both serrated pens, you will start to get a false set. Your plug will go from being about 90 degrees and it will start to turn maybe 10 or 20 degrees. What happens is a spool pen has a thicker outside diameter and a thinner inside diameter. Once all the non-spool pins are set, the plug will start to turn over, but it will get caught on that thinner inside diameter. This will be blocking plug rotation, so you'll not be able to get the lock open, and you'll still need to pick the pen. So let's just go over that now. So I'm going to start picking this lock. So 1, 2, 3, 4 are set. So now I got a little bit of a false set. We are stuck on the thinner part of the spool, so now the core has gone from a straight 90 degree and it has started to turn maybe 10 degrees. So as I start to set this spool pen, I'm going to find which one's binding, which is 5. So as you start to lift up 5, you're going to go from that thinner inside diameter to that thicker outside diameter. So as it's starting to straighten out, the plug's going to start to go back and it'll start to rotate back. In order to get this pen set, you need to allow for that counter rotation, but you need to maintain your tension as well. So try to take a look at my tension wrench and the plug physically as I start to lift driver pen 5. You can see that the plug turned back ever so slightly, and so did my tension wrench. Now when we go over to 6, just take a close look here at the plug. Try to take a look at the tension wrench as best you can, and you'll start to see that it'll start to rotate back like it is now, and now it's set and the lock has opened up. So this has been a really brief close-up on how a false set will present itself, but I would like to get a couple more angles on it for you now. Alright, so let's see how a false set presents itself when you're looking down the front of the lock here. As you can see on this lock, it already starts off slightly turned, so it's not a perfect 90 degrees, but it is off just a little bit. So let's try to open up this lock and we'll identify our false set. So one set, 2 set, 3 set, 4 set. Now all the non-spool pins are set in the lock and the plug has started to turn just a little bit more. Now we're going to search for our binding spool pin. So we're going to go over to 5. Now watch the keyway start to turn back just a little bit as we get the counter rotation on 5. And then on 6, watch both the keyway and watch the tension wrench start to counter rotate back. We're going to try to lift up 6 now. You can see that my tension wrench is lifting up ever so slightly, and now that is set and the lock has now opened up. Just to try to give you one more angle, we will take a look at this Brinks 40mm laminated padlock. Just try to pay attention to the black lines here as I pick this lock open, and once we get into a false set, you'll see the two separate from each other. So we're just going to start off with key pin 1, got a click, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so now you can see we're in a false set. You can see how the lines have started to separate, and you can kind of see the degree of how much the false set is. Now I'm just going to probe each pin for the counter rotation, which is 4. You can see that it is lifting back when you look at that black line, and we lifted that up and the lock is now open. So that was just a secondary view of what a false set looks like when it presents itself. So as a quick recap, what we went over today were the 5 pin states that you can find a pin and tumbler lock in. The first state is the resting state. This is the state that you find the lock in when it is at rest and no picking has taken place yet. The next state is the set state. This is when you have successfully set a driver pin above the shear line, the key pin has dropped back down, and the plug is no longer obstructed in that chamber. The state after that was the overset state, which is when you have set a key pin too high and it is now wedged between the Bible and the plug and it is obstructing plug rotation. After that, we went over the underset state. This is where you have been searching for your binding pin and you have started to lift it to try to clear the shear line. Unfortunately, the driver pin is not set all the way, and only part of the driver pin's in the Bible. The remainder is in the plug, and it is still obstructing plug rotation. The 5th and final state was the false set state. This state can occur when you have a pin like a spool pin, mushroom pin, or even a T-pin. What will happen is you'll set all the non-spool pins, and then the plug will start to turn over like it's going to open, but it does not. The reason it does not open is because it is still obstructed by the driver pin, and in order to get the plug open, you're going to need to pick through the false set. Either way, guys, I hope this information was very useful for you today. This is the foundation of your single pin picking. You need to understand all of these states very well and practice them. The best thing you can do to get better is just practice, 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 and I thank you all for checking it out. If you guys have any questions or suggestions, please leave them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more like it, please subscribe. As always, thank you so much for checking this out, and I hope you all have a great day.